So, greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that you're well. I certainly am, because I am joined by a very special guest, and you may know him already because from YouTube, this is nazarinprod, or otherwise known as Peter Campbell. So, Peter, welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing fine. We've actually got snow at the moment in Scotland. It's quite nice.
Oh, it's snowing today.
Yep, snow.
Oh, that's great. Is this the first snowfall of the year?
Yeah, I haven't seen any snow so far, so it's first snow for me. We've had ice, but not snow. So this is the first snow we've had. It's more than melted now. We've got it in the morning, which is nice.
Oh my God. So is it quite cold now where you are at the moment?
Yeah, but that's Scotland. Scotland's always cold. Scotland's cold in the summer, never mind the winter. So it's just, you get used to it.
Well, anyway, despite the snow, you managed to take some of your very valuable time today and stop by. So I really want to thank you very much for that, my friend. So, Peter, Peter Campbell. So you are, of course, a very active film fan and enthusiast and critic and reviewer. You are a man of many hats, as it were. And so I'm going to try today to talk with you and to hear your thoughts about cinema and your own personal cinema journey, as I like to call it. So I'm looking forward to this today, my friend.
Thanks, I'm looking forward as well.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I guess we'll just start with you and the type of work you're doing, say, on YouTube and podcasts and the like. So, for anyone who is maybe meeting you for the first time, could you just let us know, for instance, about, let's start with your YouTube channel. So, we, of course, know that you have a YouTube channel where you talk about cinema, but for anyone who's meeting you for the first time, could you let us know a little bit about that, please?
Okay, I have a YouTube channel called nazarinprod, which came actually from a Buñuel film called Nazarin. So I'm a big Buñuel fan, so that's why it's called Nazarin Fraud. Just some people actually thought, "Are you religious?" I was like, "No, I like a film. I'm a big Buñuel fan." That's it. There's nothing deeper. But that's it was actually I shot a film with my friend Gavin years ago, like a feature length film, and it was and we called the thing. It was called we're being nostalgic, and we had Nazareth Productions to present. So actually, the channel set up just to do little trailers for it and see what happened with it. And once that was done, it was like, okay, well, I've got a YouTube channel, and I forgot all about it for ages. So I just like this was like 2010 or something, so it was a long time ago, and I just sort of stuck around and just in the background. And then I just started to put little things up on it because I just thought it'd be fun to do. And because at the same time I was also helping run a local community radio station, so I would do videos for them, which was like little bands, local bands would come in, and we'd shoot them in the studio doing these little live sessions, and we would actually use the audio from the sessions and I'd video it and would create these little videos to promote the bands. So that is partially what this channel was doing as well for a while. So you can actually find some of them on my channel somewhere in the background. They're still there. And then sold them into doing reviews, really. And it took a while to work out what I was going to do because I was a bit unsure. I first thought maybe I should try and start doing them about popular films. And it never quite worked out. Like I had nothing really to say about stuff like the Marvel films. You can still see some of them in the up, like some of the Marvel films, but it was like it wasn't really me, so I wasn't very comfortable doing them. And I was still learning how to talk in camera. And so eventually I started to find my own style, really, which was to do videos about like house films or some stranger films. So it became what it became. So that's kind of the background.
And so, what are the types of films that you tend to talk about more, or maybe to put it another way, what are some of those video discussions that you have on your channel that you are in particular very proud of, or that stand out to you as some examples of your channel?
Well, I did the thing I'm probably most proud of. There's two things, but I did at the same time, and this was utterly insane. So I didn't plan it; it just happened. Was I did a Bresson season the same time I was doing a season about concentration camp films and World War II Holocaust films. And they're two of my favorite series of videos. You get stuff like Shower, and you'd get camp concentration videos, or just documentaries are made at the time, mixed with the same time I was doing all these Bresson films, like the most normal ones like Pickpocket and The Man Escaped, as well as some of his 70s films no one watches, like now I've gone blank, The Devil Probably, things like that. So those are the two I'm kind of most proud of. They're both done at the same time. That's probably the kind of peak, but I try and just follow my nose. Like I'll do this and I'll do that, and I'll just try and find things that interest me. Like this year, my channel's been more about like Asian films more because I was really into Asian films with influence of people like Eric from Asian Movie Enthusiast and Who's from Touch of Film. They've been recommending a lot of films, and they've been doing current films on their channel, and it's become like I've been following that up. So I've been doing a lot of stuff at Sion Sono this year and Tsukamoto, and I really like them. So it goes around. I just try and see what I find interesting, because I've done stuff with Alan Clark as well, which I'm quite proud of. But as you just the sound of it varies a lot, just depending on what interests me, really.
Interesting. So that's great. And you mentioned, of course, among many things, you mentioned Robert Bresson. So, what were some of those traits or characteristics or aspects of Bresson's films that really stood out to you as you were examining them during that series of yours on your YouTube channel? And also, maybe what are some examples of some great Bresson films that stood out to you along the way?
Well, my favorite Bresson film is probably Bichette, which isn't the one everyone obviously says. But I was very lucky to see Bresson early in the cinema, because in the Edinburgh Film Festival in the late 90s had a Robert Bresson season. And I was in Edinburgh at the time for some other reason, and I could actually go and see all these films in the cinema, which was great because I saw like 4 or 5 of his films in the cinema. So I've seen films like Pickpocket in the cinema, I've seen Mouchette, Balthazar, um, I've seen Dario Country Priest as well in the cinema. I've seen quite a few of them in the cinema. And the thing was, because Bresson keeps emotion back, the thing I find really impressive about him is how emotional the film is, even when it's complicated. There's a lot of emotion below the surface, and it's about the complications of life and how people react to it. And that's what I really like about him. It's not just obvious. Even though he's a director who likes religious themes, he doesn't really make religious films. He makes films about how it affects people's lives, and he takes away the obvious emotion, just shows you the emotion below the surface, the emotion that's bubbling under, that's not so obvious. And I think that's something I really like with Bresson. I think it influenced a lot of European cinema, really.
Yeah, I'm that's really great. You know, I agree with that because there is a lot of emotion and invested emotion that is involved in any viewing of a Bresson film. You mentioned Mouchette, for example. I mean, there's a lot of complication, life complication represented
Yeah,
in this in this main character's life and her
yeah,
growing up in this community and
yeah,
coming of age in this very dark and bleak set of circumstances with the family unit and outside of that, of course. So there's a lot of complication and a lot of of a really human drama there. So, and it's you're absolutely right to identify that. I agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing I like about Bresson also is he changed over time. He never, even though he had his own style, like his 50s films and this different from the 60s films and the different from the 70s films. It's very similar to like Bergman. He always used to change a little bit as he went older, and they took into account his changing attitudes. He wasn't trying to make the same film he made 10 years before. So there's always a slight difference to the films, which I always really liked. That he'd see a development, really, which was very good because if you look at something like Diver Country Priest against something like Largent, they feel like the same director but very different at the same time. It's like there has been a development.
Yeah, that's a really good point. There's a sense of maybe Bresson's films in a particular time, and depending on that time, there's a certain a set of sensibilities, shall we say. That's very interesting. I agree with that too. And of course, you aren't only doing your YouTube channel, which is itself very active, but you do other aspects and other maybe fields of cinema discussion and reviews and criticisms, podcast work and the like. So uh, again, as a means of further introducing yourself to anyone who might be meeting you for the first time, could you tell us a little bit about maybe some of your other ways in which you are talking about cinema, and where people can find that if they're interested in listening more or hearing more about that?
Well, there's two other things I tend to do, which is Nazarin. I do Rodan Nazarin podcast with Solitary Ronan, who hopefully your viewers are aware of because we met up via you basically, and he's another Scottish YouTuber, and we've created a podcast just so we can talk through either a theme or uh certain directors. Like we're doing a Bergman season just now. The irony of the whole thing was the thing that started the podcast was something we haven't actually done yet, which is we're both into these all these European films from the 60s, the Eastern European films. We thought we better do something together with this because we're both going to do this. And then we started the podcast and we never touched them. And we still have to do them, which is very weird. But as we talk, we've done videos on directors like Richard Lester. We've done David David Cronenberg. We've also done an extended version of the Bergman box set. We're doing it very slowly, going through individual films. I've seen your videos where you do the individual ones. It's similar, but it's just two people talking rather than one person talking. And we're not doing in any kind of order. We're just doing them in, I fancy that one this time. I fancy this one this time. And it's just like we just try and do a kind of more random view of that. So there's that channel, and we also bring on some other people. Sometimes we've brought on SGS Films as a guest, brought on Isaac Dunn's a guest. Every so often bring on guests, brought you as a guest. It's it's like we're just trying to keep interest and we're just trying to amuse ourselves mainly. So that was back in February. We're just a bit slow this beginning of the year just get started, but we're now talking about starting again in February. Um, so we do have plans to keep going there. You also find me at Earshot Online Radio. I've got an hour-long show which is about film soundtracks, basically. It's on Wednesday night, and basically, I I just put different soundtracks on and talk a little bit about the films around them. So you can find stuff like the Godzilla soundtrack to something a Terrence Malick film, you know, a lot of David Lynch. If you like David Lynch music, there's a lot of it here. If you like David Lynch films, there's tons of it. And it's also followed by Solitary Rodent's radio show, which isn't film based, but he does one right after me. So, so that was a radio station I actually helped set up. I wasn't the person who really started it, but I helped them work out how to do it. But now I've stepped back a little bit now. But so it's friends who do it, and we've just set this online video station up. So that's another thing I do, basically. Really,
Uh, Wow, wow, that's great. And thank you very much for mentioning Solitary Ronin, our dear friend Solitary Ronin. and of course he has his own YouTube channel, and of course you and he have been doing your podcasts, which is also found on YouTube as well as its own separate channel. So that's great, and thank you very much. Yes, I you were very kind to invite me as a guest for an episode, and
It was
so
great, really good fun.
I was very flattered by that. So thank you very much, and I had a really fun time talking with you. It was
Yeah,
uh,
those tend to be the most fun ones we find actually is the ones we bring other people on because it's just not just us, so it's quite nice to let other people and hear what they're going to say. It just is more enjoyable for us.
yeah, and also you mentioned SJ, our dear friends SJS Films and Isaac, and so that's great. So I look forward, and I know I speak for a lot of other people when I say I am very much looking forward to the future installments. So
Oh, thanks.
and you and Solitaire Ronin have a really great back and forth and good rapport with each other. So it's as you say, it's always nice to get different opinions and perspectives. So keep up the great work with that, my friend.
Thanks. I mean, I think the good thing about me and Ronan is we're similar but we're different. It's not quite the same. There's certain overlap. There's other things that we're completely different on. So it's a nice balance of the same but different.
Yeah, that's as I say, that's the makings of a great combination right there. So again, thank you for the work that you're doing there, uh, um, and thank you also for mentioning those channels and Solitary Ronin. So, but you also mentioned the radio work that you do, and you're focusing on soundtracks, and you mentioned examples like David Lynch films. I have to ask you, yeah, you brought it up, so I have to ask you, what are some examples of your favorite David Lynch film soundtracks?
Well, Blue Velvet is a must. Blue Velvet is stunningly good. I also think the most underrated one is Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. That's a soundtrack with wall to wall great stuff going on. That is that's actually I actually saw that in the cinema and it scared the hell out of me. That's one of the few films that scared the hell out of me in the cinema because it was just stunning. And I pretty much said that the Twin Peaks Return pretty much was the thing of the last decade. That's the best thing. I don't care what you call film or TV or whatever. For me, that's the great work of the last decade, really.
I I I agree with you about the greatness of that work, and it seems to be holding up so well.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you mentioned Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me too. Without going into too much detail, I can say that it's also one of my favorite Lynch films, and I'm so glad too because there's a certain way that it seems to have maybe grown or altered, or maybe perspectives have have well, let me put it this way: there's with the return, there's an interesting way of looking back on the stuff that came before, including Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. Let me put it that way. So,
I think people get it now. They didn't get it when it came out, and now they get it. Like, that's what it was. That's what it all was. And it was like, I think it's just one of those things. Some films just come out and get horribly destroyed, and they just come at the wrong time. I mean, you look at John Carpenter's A Thing, that get destroyed and released, and now it's 3 views of work of genius. It's just like it was just too strong for people when it came out, so it was like keep away from me.
yeah, but it's the thing about cinema and time,
Yeah,
and new generations coming to it and maybe
yeah,
discovering it or rediscovering it. So that's one of the fascinating things about it. But that's interesting too because it brings me also in I think in a direct way to the idea of cinema and time, but also let's bring it to you and your personal journeys. So one of the reasons why I wanted to ask you on, Peter, was to really try to get to know a little bit more about you. I mean, we've been friends online,
yeah.
and it's been a great pleasure for me to be able to know you for a number of years now. But I don't think we've had the opportunity to talk about your cinema journey specifically. And so I'd love to hear about that, if that's okay. I mean, I suppose the place to start would be the beginning, as it were. And so, what were some of those films that you recall watching growing up as a kid? And what were those landmark or milestone cinematic moments for you that you could say really helped to shape your cinema journey to where it is now? So let's start at the beginning. So what was your cinema journey like at the start, my friend?
Well, when I was a kid, I'm just a kid, so you like certain things. But I mean, there were certain directors who have stuff I liked. I didn't understand with the directed quite a few films I liked a lot. I mean, one of the directors I liked, I found that I liked a lot of his films just by the fact I'd realised he directed a lot of the things I liked was Richard Lester, because I was a big Musketeer fan, and I was a big fan of Superman 2, and I'd seen Juggernaut, which was this little movie made, and I'd seen Funny Thing Happened to Me before. I'd seen a lot of his films, but hadn't placed it together. It was the same guy who did them. And it was really interesting to realise it's the same director. Like, one director can do all these films. And it's the same way when you see, like, later on, you realise that you watch some films and you see Kubrick's name come up and you realise he's directed a lot of films you really like as well. And it just becomes this thing of, I want to see more of a certain director because I like their films. But as a kid, generally, any kind of adventure story I really enjoyed. I was a big fan of Looney Tunes, like the cartoons. I still adore Looney Tunes. So I just like their kind of almost surreal element, how they take the animation to the craziest way possible. But I mean, I was a Star Wars kid, really. I mean, Star Wars, Star Trek, all that stuff. I watched all those things, three Harryhausen films as a kid, which is funny. If you watch, to show me Harryhausen to a kid even now, it's still like, so I showed it to my nephew, and he was like some of the Sinbad films that should look a bit old fashioned. No, it was fine. Just show them it, and they were really happy. So things like that, just the adventure things. I was never really into realism. Even as I got older, I'm not a person who really is going to watch a lot of Ken Loach films or something. I'm not interested in realism. I'm much more interested in what someone can do with the medium. Like, I'd much rather watch a Michael Powell movie than a Ken Loach movie, because I like seeing a director use their imagination. You know, it's more interesting to me than seeing someone. Because I always think with realism, I can always see the fakery. Like, it's like, no one would do that. And with more fantastical directors, or more directors who are more imaginative, that's less of a issue for it, really. So it doesn't really bother me that much. I'm not sure I've explained that right, but it's like it's someone like Bresson. He's using realistic settings and situations and characters, but you can see his imagination going through the films. There's an imaginative soul to the films that float through it. It's not just about the way the realistic things set up. Like the end of Machete, for example, was very poetic. There's something beyond showing you the basics of the story. Does that make sense?
No, it does. It does, and I think in that way, it's very much. It makes a lot of sense that you mentioned, for example, a filmmaker like Lester, like Richard Lester, because I think Richard Lester is another great example. His cinema is another great example of somehow using the medium or trying to play with the form. It tends to go in certain directions that have this witty or maybe comic or humorous slant to them. But of course, there's much more going on, as you I think have correctly identified. So that's it. And of course, you mentioned fantasy and action films, Star Wars and Star Trek, etc. So were these were there any, for example, any movie theater or cinema going moments in particular that struck you growing up? Was there any film that you saw, say, in the theater that what's the phrase that really blew your socks off, as it were?
Oh, Pinocchio scared the hell out of me. Pinocchio
Pinocchio.
really scared the hell out of me when I was a kid. Because I was re-released when I was about 4 or 5. I saw it and I was like, ugh. The fox and the cat just terrified me. But I remember seeing Superman 2 which is an original Leicester film, and I was just entranced because it had, it's something I didn't understand at the time, was the idea that it had the adventure, but it also had the kind of subversion of the adventure going through at the same time. And it connected me in an emotional way that didn't really, because I didn't have any critical view of facility at the time. It was just something, oh, I get that. That's the kind of thing I like, really. And as I got older, that's what I quite liked. Even though as I moved into like more grown up films, more grown up themes, I liked the idea of the kind of um, the stylization, the kind of emotion, the kind of poetic elements of the film being there. It doesn't have to be realism all the time. It has to be something deeper. Like, I think I get bored pretty easily if someone's trying to be not too normal. I get really bored. If you look at my channel, it's either masterpieces or very weird films that not many people would watch, you know, because I don't really like the kind of more normal films. I'm just not into that. It's just not really my kind of thing. So I'm just more interested in what interests me, really. Why does it interest me? What would drive my interest to that? And that's what I'm trying to talk about.
Hmm. Interesting. And I can definitely see I can definitely see that perspective. And I suppose then it's the idea of maybe trying to find cinema or examples in cinema of where someone is, and forgive me for the poor expression. I know it's much more than this as you've described it, but maybe looking for examples of cinema where someone is trying to push the boundaries of the medium in some way. And so I yeah, I think that's interesting. I think then I have to ask you though, which is where do you see let's say documentary films in that cinema perspective of yours? I mean, you mentioned, for instance, when you were talking about your YouTube channel, nazarinprod, you mentioned that you were very proud of, say, your discussion of various documentaries dealing with the period of the Holocaust, for example, in the 20th century, and so that of course involves a lot of cinema of a documentary style. And so, where do you find the documentary cinema aspect fall in your own cinema journey? Given what you've said about, say, wanting to watch films that seem to be trying to push the envelope in one form or another.
Well, I like documentaries a lot. I watch so many nature documentaries. I have tons of them because I just like watching them. I really like documentaries. I actually would rather watch a documentary about a subject than a fictional film that's going to have lots of half truths about something. I'd rather just see the source and get, okay, that's information. That's what I need to know. I'd much rather see that than a fictional version of it. It's just what I prefer. Yeah, I mean, anytime I hear, I mean, there was the Emperor's Naked Army Marches On is one of the great documentaries of all time. It is a stunner. I know you've covered it, I've covered it, everyone I know has covered it. Everyone's seen it, covers it. It's like, because no one can believe what they're seeing. And it's amazing. I mean, Grey Gardens is amazing. You couldn't make that up. That's just so strange, and try to work out what's going on with these people. I really adore documentaries. There's The Look of Silence as well. Some of the Herzog documentaries are wonderful because he takes the documentary format to a very strange place. It's very personal and uniquely his, and it's not always rational, but that's what's great about it. I mean, he did this one, the Caves of Forgotten Dreams, which is a wonderful one. It's probably not seen as much as some of the other ones because it's about a cave in cavemen. It was like, so I really love all that stuff. But yeah, I watched like way too many documentaries. If I can see a documentary, anything that interests me, I'll watch it because I like that kind of thing. And usually, there's Alan Gibby does a lot of good ones. I covered him recently. He's done some good ones. But he goes all over the place. Like he does political ones. He does ones about strange entrepreneurs who might be a bit dodgy, might not be, and he just covers whatever interests him. So yeah, I mean, for realism, I'll probably go to documentary more than I'd go for fictional film. Of course, there is one big exception, though, for me, though, as I'm a massive fan of Ozu, who's a much more realistic director, but I think he's a very poetic director as well. You know, I just realised when I was talking that I said I don't like realism, but one of my favourite directors is Ozu. I was like, it's a bit off.
Yeah, that's an interesting example that you bring, a Yasujiro Ozu. Yeah, this is something where, is it realism in his cinema, or is it the suggestion of realism, which is, of course, another way to say the suggestion of realism is poetry, right? So,
Yeah,
because poetry is, of course, something that in it of itself is not necessarily real, but it seems to suggest something of the real, or something that could be reminding you of the real or reflective nature. And I think that's Ozu, for sure. So, but there are things about Ozu films where you watch them, and this is something that I can. There's powerful scenes that you see and you think, wow, this is really connecting with me on a personal level. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But things it transcends where you come from, because it feels it's set in Japan. Back and look at that, and the way the family dynamics are, it's just as close to something you see in Scotland. Some of the social things would be different, but the emotions the same. A lot of the stuff is still the same. It's still human nature. The houses are built differently. The way people express themselves are different, but the human nature element is still everyone's the same basically. We all have little differences, but we're all kind of there's this commonality that Ozu really brings out in his films. But what I like about Ozu is it's almost like his films are like short stories, which he kind of slowly expands on to create these films, really. And it means he can actually cover a lot in a very simple way rather than trying to expand things with a over plotting something when you actually can just have people sit down and talk for 10 minutes, and actually makes much more emotional impact than it would massive plot or anything. Because if you look at the one where he's trying to get his daughter to marry because the guy doesn't want her to be alone because she's too loyal to her parents. What's that called again?
Late Spring, maybe.
Yeah,
Yes.
its
Yes.
titles are always the same, very similar.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
I've seen the films, but I can't remember the titles.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, but Late Spring is the one. That's with the father daughter
yeah,
dynamic. Yes. Yes.
I know. I mean,
I'm sorry.
it's
Yes.
like this is a beautiful film. That could take place anywhere in the world, and everyone would get it. It's just beautiful. But again, there is realism, but there's also poetry. But I've been into Fakasuko, the guy who did Battles with Honor and Humanity. I'm into him. I know I pronounced his name wrong. I always pronounce his name wrong. Uh, and he's brilliant. I've been watching this stuff this year, Graveyard of Honor, all these other smaller films. And he's kind of realism, but kind of fictional at the same time. But he creates this amazing feeling in the world. And it's just stunning. Like I'm a huge fan of his now. I'm really like addicted to his films now.
And many of his films, I think, have been made available, say, through Arrow Video, and
Yeah,
so there's some great opportunities to see a lot of those great Japanese films.
yeah,
And so, yeah, I'm so glad. And you, as you said at the very outset, you said in this year you're focusing more, or maybe trying to focus more with your YouTube channel with Asian cinema. And so,
yeah. I think I'm going to do influences of other people saying you should see this, or just talking about films like, yeah, I need to see that, I need to see this. And I've actually got some I haven't watched yet. That An Elephant Sitting Still. I've got to watch. There's still Sakamoto films to watch, and it's like I've actually got a whole Asian to watch list that I've bought now. That's how far it's out of control. So there's more to come.
yeah, well, you mentioned Tsukamoto. Yeah, so Tsukamoto, yes. So, and you also mentioned earlier a couple our friends, Asian movie enthusiast,
Yeah.
and also a touch of film.
Yeah.
And yeah, they are in many ways like the go-to when it comes to Asian cinema discussions. And so that's great, and I'm so glad that you're joining in on that discussion of this area of cinema. It's very exciting.
Yeah, it was nice to be invited to this podcast sometimes. It's also nice just to we're watching and commenting as do it as well. I've commented some of yours as well as you did yours, but you're doing Bond just now, and I'm not really into Bond at the moment, so it's like, um, but it's quite nice because you also get to talk to someone like Eric, who's a movie enthusiast. You get to talk to Dion, who's a very nice guy, and he's got his own little channel of his own. Like he's into the new indie things. And you have Hus, who's a lovely guy, and he's got his films, which are feel very different from what Eric does. They're the same area, but they're different. They feel very different, and you can watch both of them, and they might disagree in a film, and it's like, well, that's interesting. Like,
Dion, thank you very much for mentioning him as well. So yeah, he is always on the what's like the cutting edge, if you will. And it's and he's always and he's of course he's studying this as well, so he's like from
yeah,
an academic vantage point. So yeah, very intelligent guy, and that's yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned them. So
I studied film as well. I've got a film degree. I went to Sheffield Hallam University to study film too, so it's kind of interesting because I do watch it from that point of view, but also a fan's point of view at the same time. So I'm probably in between somewhere. Like I have studied it, but I'm not like to degree level. But I'm not. I don't always use it, but it's probably there in my thinking. But films in the background somewhere.
where what do you think therefore or what do you identify then as being your way of watching cinema through this, say, film studies lens? As you say, you've come from that educational background. So, what would you say when you were watching a film? How would you distinguish, say, watching a film through that film studies lens versus watching a film through, say, another lens? What do you think is are the key points for you for that?
Um, it depends on the film because sometimes there's some films I'm not going to watch it through that lens like at all. But it just means I can analyze something. I don't just say you see a lot of people talk about films, they say, well, that sucked. That's it. And it's like, I'd much rather say, well, why did it fail? Like, what was the problem with the film? So one thing I do in some of my videos is I choose a film that is a disaster and actually say, okay, why was it a failure? Why did it collapse? Or look at a film that kind of half works, half doesn't work, and say, okay, what works, what doesn't work? But it also means like I'm looking for like themes like visual sense and how they use the camera to create an emotion that's there. Are they doing it satirically or are they doing it genuinely? Are they like a melodramatic director like John Woo is, or are they being a bit more distance from it, like someone like Brian De Palma, who I've always been a massive fan of. He's been one of my favorite directors for years because he does the emotional thing, but he's also, you can see the hand satirized at the same time. And it's like try to figure out what they're about really and do succeed and where do they succeed. So even like a lot of my favorite directors, there might be a film or two I don't like that's, and I don't mind that. It's just the way things go. I mean, um, but I can analyze it, but sometimes I don't want to. Depends on the film, really.
That's you mentioned Brian De Palma, and so I have to ask, what are some examples of Brian De Palma films for you that work for you in particular?
Well, my I actually don't even have a favourite now. There's so many of them. I'm a massive fan of. I've done quite a lot of films on my channel. I'm actually going back to do some of the other ones now because I took a little break because I did so many and it was like I've done way too many of these. I need to stop for a bit. And but I'll bring up a couple that probably aren't as known because I mean the obvious ones are like Scarface and Untouchables and stuff like that, which are normal. But I'm a big fan of things like Phantom of the Paradise, Femme Fatale, things like that are Raising Cain, which is a really hilarious film about craziness and is so self-aware about how the fact is riffing on Hitchcock, but knows it's riffing on Hitchcock, and actually it's riffing on Michael Palma and Hitchcock, but no one seems to notice that. And it's like, that's part of the joke, that it's actually riffing on someone else and no one's noticed. And they're riffing on stuff like Sweet Smell Success as well. There's jokes about that as well, and it's like people are missing a good 2/3 of the jokes in this film because they're just thinking Hitchcock, 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 and it's like, and it's just De Palma stuff I just find really, really fun. Even one of his later films, The Passion, which is a very flawed film, it's still fascinating. There's still some really cool stuff in it that's really interesting to watch. Even the last one he did, can't remember what the title was. It's one in Europe, which had some problems. You could tell it had been under budgeted. There was still some really core De Palma things in there. It was just very flawed, but it was still like, you still see him there. There's still some wonderful things. Like Guy Pearce played a character that was very De Palma-ish. He was the villain. He's like, you imagine John Lithgow playing that part because of that kind of flair to it. So, yeah, I really adore De Palma. I love Dressed to Kill, which is a really funny film, and it's kind of almost a black comedy about sexual confusion with a thriller element, and it's just that kind of feel to it that's different. Hope I didn't just ramble on there.
Oh
I
no, that
can't
was
ramble with
great.
De Palma.
No, that's great. I never, I've never met Brian De Palma, but when I was living in New York for a little bit, I was just walking down some street in the daytime in lower Manhattan, and it was near Union. It was near Washington Square Park, I think, or Union Square. And
Yeah,
I was walking by a restaurant, and I looked in because it had this large window. I looked in, and there was Brian De Palma sitting in the table in the restaurant by himself and eating. And I remember
yeah,
he was wearing, he has this Brian De Palma look, the
yeah,
jacket, and he was wearing that. And I was so, wow, that's Brian De Palma. It's like, frame. It's like that restaurant glass in
yeah,
Mission Impossible. Speaking of Brian De Palma, and
yeah,
Tom Cruise, yeah, so that's yeah, Brian De Palma. I'm so glad you mentioned him and his works. Yeah, and
yeah,
there's another one for you when it comes to someone who has a really interesting filmography that has
yeah,
changed over time. You
yeah,
spoke about Bresson earlier, but talk about Brian De Palma, yeah, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and of course beyond. So,
yeah,
very interesting career, for sure. Very interesting indeed. Yeah.
yeah. I'm also a big fan of Fritz Lang, who was kind of the guy before Hitchcock, and I was kind of annoyed that Hitchcock got all the praise. I think some of it should have gone to Lang because Lang's so good as well, and Lang was set up a lot of the language that Hitchcock then built upon for his films, which the Palma then built for his films. Is like, to me, it's a lineage, really, rather than it's all Hitchcock. I just think it's a lineage of skill in this certain one area of melodramas that's doing thrillers. I just feel there's a lineage of directors who advance it slowly but surely over time. So
That's great. So Fritz Lang, of course, is and you're
yeah,
mentioning the lineage that you identify. So this brings me very nicely, thank you, to the next question, which is, so what are some of those, say, films or filmmakers that you have been interested in the more recent part or recent years of your cinema journey? You've mentioned a few already, but are there any others, or are there any other works in particular that have guided you in your journey as you in the more recent years?
um, it's one of the things. There's so many good people. It's just like trying to put them down. I mean, I I think a lot of I'm trying to watch a lot of films that aren't just from the West at the moment. That's the big thing. And I'm kind of one of those people now who think that Asia is where a lot of the really good directors are, like Sion Sono, Tsukamoto. I mean, Tsukamoto in the last 2 decades has done some stunning work. I mean, Vital is a masterpiece. Gemini is a masterpiece. The Killing was stunning. Kotoko was amazing. I mean, he's just been doing stunning work after stunning work, and he's getting no attention. Like Sion Sono's done so much good stuff. When you get him a good day, Takashi Miike is so good. There's so many like Korean directors that I'm starting into now, whose names I'm still trying to remember, but I'm still getting into all this thing. But I think Asia's where a lot of the interesting work is coming from just now. It just seems like that's where the Renaissance is. There's also some interesting people coming out of like Iran and things like that are. I'm starting to try and watch their work too. America seems to be like everyone's copying Scorsese or something like that. It just is boring to me. But I'd much rather watch directors who can take their influences then do something new with it. Like there are still good directors in America, like Paul Thomas Anderson and Wes Anderson. There's still interesting people there, but because they're doing their own thing. But a lot of the time, it just feels like people are. I mean, a lot of they haven't quite figured out the next thing for American cinema. They're still trying to work it out. I'm sure there'll be explosions soon of new talent that'll be very different from the old. But at the moment, it just feels like they're in a kind of commercial rut. They're not quite. Everyone wants to do the next Marvel movie or something like that rather than the next interesting movie. So America's kind of this weird point. But I think other cultures who don't really have that are just making film after film to make a living or doing more interesting, engaging work, really. Because I tend to go with where's the good, interesting work. I don't really care where it's from. I'd rather just watch what's good. But Tsukamoto is especially good. I think he is just. I've really been knocked out by his film and Sono as well. I mean, some of this Love Exposure is a stunning film. It really. We can't hear you.
Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay. So
yeah.
yeah. So I agree. And yeah, it's been one of my. It's. I think. I have right the YouTube channel here, and one of the films that people have asked me so much about is Love Exposure. When are you going to talk about love? And yeah, it's very overwhelming. It's actually I don't know where to begin, to be perfect. It's just so much to try to. So, but it's breathtaking.
That one. I mean, when I did that one, I was very, very nervous. I was like, how do you start on this one? I just started talking and just like, hopefully this will work because I don't know what to do with this one. But then he just made Forrester Love, the long version, which was a stunning film as well, which was very different. And it was like, and he kind of reminds me of De Palma in some ways because he doesn't really mind mocking himself. He doesn't really mind referencing himself and referencing other people as long as he can find something within that to do his thing with. Like something like Cold Fish, you think, that seems like a very minor kind of film. Why would you do that? And you watch the film and it's like, wow, that's just amazing.
And so I'm so glad you mentioned him, and you also mentioned, of course, Tsukamoto very much, and Miike as well, and others. So this is
First Love is amazing.
Yeah, and oh my goodness, this is very exciting. What are some other Miike films, by the way? Of course, you mentioned. So what are some others? I mean, there are so many, but
yeah, I mean, Each the Killer, which is really good. Yeah. I really adore the trilogy he did with the direct-to-video one, Dead or Alive, because it's so pulpy but so much fun. I mean, especially the second one. The second one I really adore. Audition, obviously. Gozu is one of my favorites. Gozu is not talked about as much, but Gozu I really enjoy. It's a acquired taste. It's one of those ones that's like you either love or you hate it, and I really adore that one. And it just goes, you're never quite sure what he's going to do next, which is what I like about him. That's what I like any director. It's like, what are you going to do next? Are you going to do something interesting, or are you just going to do the same old? I get really bored by people doing the same old stuff. If you're doing that, I kind of lose interest in you. that's why there's certain like directors who used to be big that I'm not interested in anymore, because it's like I've seen your best stuff and this stuff just seems a bit samey, really. So I'd much rather directors just retire if they've run out of material, you know.
Uh, that's interesting about how, and it actually about that ties in very nicely, I think, with what you were saying before, which is when you're looking at cinema, you're trying to look for something that is maybe fresh or innovative with the
Yeah.
form or medium. And so if you identify something that maybe seems for you to be somewhat repetitive or reductive, then maybe it's something where you might lose interest. Does that seem like an accurate assessment?
Yeah, but there's also directors who did some of the best stuff and they're much older. I mean, like Dreyer, some of his great stuff came when he was pretty much almost dying. Really, he was like some of his late stuff is Gertrude, I think, is a stunner. Or Debt is amazing. I mean, he did a lot of great stuff when he was young, but also did some amazing stuff when he was older. Bresson did some really amazing stuff. I mean, it's like it depends on what you're going to see, really, what you have that's interesting for people. That's really what I'm interested in. But it's depth as well. I want depth within what they're making. Really, I want them to actually be making something that's to me is interesting. But then again, I can dislike something. Everyone else loves it, and it's fine. It's like I don't really care. I mean, I did not like The Irishman. Everyone else likes The Irishman. It's like who cares? Doesn't matter. I'm not that bothered because it's like you look at that as well. People have different tastes, and there
Of
you go.
course, of course. There's no law or rule that says that you have to like something. I mean,
Yeah,
if anything, it's probably the other way because it's it's especially in today's age, it costs money for a viewer to watch something, and so I think it's also possible to see it as another way, which is the default, which is show me what you have, that sort of thing. And I think that's a very legitimate and reasonable perspective to hold. That's for sure. So yeah, there's nothing that says you have to like something.
yeah,
But speaking of what you do like, I guess the next natural question to ask would be, and I know it's one of these questions that it's very difficult to answer. It certainly is for me, because my answers tend to change depending on my mood and the time of
yeah.
day, I suppose. But my next question is, so what would be some of those films? You don't have to give us a definitive one, a list, but what would be some of those films that would or could fall on your favorite films of all time kind of thing, if you had to think about it? Again, you don't have to, you can be as definitive or as maybe as not so definitive as possible. But what will be some candidates? Let's put it that way.
I'll just give the ones I've got in my head as my favourites, things I'd just happily watch. Might be easier. Barry Lyndon, Exterminating Angel, um, Tokyo Story, To Have and Have Not, um, Excalibur. I'm a massive Boorman fan. Even this weaker film, I'm still a massive Boorman fan. Magnificent Ambersons, even though the ending was ruined, I still adore the way it was shot. I'm a massive Welsh fan as well. It's just something your mind suddenly goes blank. The Nibelungen, the Fritz Lang epic that's like 4 hours long. It's I adore that film. It's really brutal though. It's really like disturbing. Sancho the Bailiff is stunner. The I'm still trying to get a good copy of it, but I'll get there. Um, Manhunter, the Michael Mann's film Manhunter, I think it's just creepy as hell. It's one of those few films that creep me out. Blue Velvet is just one of those great films that's always been great. Starship Troopers I adore because it's a satire and all our worst impulses, and it's intentionally cheesy. I like intentionally cheesy if you can do intentionally cheesy. So I'm trying to think. Phantom of the Paradise, another one. It's like, again, it's not the most traditional one, but I adore it. So I think those are the ones that jump out at me as films I'd have to watch anytime. That I think are high quality films. They've got they're really strong on their own, but they've got something going on.
Yeah, you've mentioned so many there. I mean, one can talk about those for a long time and discuss them. I mean, discuss them. Excuse me, like a film um, like Starship Troopers you mentioned, which I find very
Yeah,
fascinating, and also Phantom of the Paradise, which you mentioned earlier with your Brian De Palma discussion.
yeah.
And my goodness, there's so many there. Yeah, yeah. What I guess that would be what would be some that that would be your favorites, but that you think are maybe underappreciated or underrated, or maybe things that others might not necessarily have seen, or maybe might surprise people as being among your favorites. Are there others like that for you?
Yeah. Oh, I tend to make a whole series of that. I've got, what the hell is this? I have a series called that, which are really weird films or beautiful disasters. So there's Speed Racer's one. I adore Speed Racer. It's a very underrated film. It's very weird. It's like one of those films I've always adored since it was released. And it doesn't get much love. I mean, Wachowski's generally, I like Wachowski's generally. They're very odd directors, but I really like the films. Even the flops I like. There's that. Trying to think. I'm trying to find some good Bed Sitting Room, Richard Lester one. That's barely seen. It's wonderful. I mean, any like Privilege is terrific. I did a video on that one. That's very underseen. And so's Peter Watkins. He also did what was the I've lost the title of the other one about communists in Paris. I've just done a video, but I've lost it. Out one, which I talked to you about before. I've done the videos on that one. It's hard to see, but it's stunning. It's really worth the time to see that one. I had some in my head, but I can't remember what it was. The Bill Forsyth trilogy, not Bill Forsyth, the Bill Douglas trilogy. Try and see that one. It's hard to get hold of, but BFI released it. Try and get hold of that one. It's amazing. And it's set in Scotland. It's a genuine Scottish masterpiece.
That is great, my friend. And I forgot to say too, in your earlier list, you mentioned Manhunter.
Yep.
And I'm not going to be specific as to what scene it is, but there's a particular moment where one of the characters says the phrase "Here I am," but the way that he says it is very creepy.
Yes.
He says, "Here I am."
Yeah.
It's very chilling indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
there's a
My favorite of that one's "You Were Slug in the Sun." It's just such a same character.
yeah.
It's just weird. But yeah, no, like I don't talk about Manhunter that much now because I've feeling I've talked about it so much that it's gotten boring. It's the same way I've started to avoid talking about Starship Troopers as well because I feel I've done a few videos covering it. So it's like, okay, I need to kind of put that to the side. I get to the point now with certain films is like, I'll try not to talk about this now because I think I've done enough. People are just going to be sick of it. So I try and do that sometimes.
Are there any films that maybe you saw first that you didn't like, but then over time you grew to like?
Yeah, the biggest one, The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing, because I think the first time I saw it, it scared the hell out of me, and it disturbed me in ways I wasn't quite sure of. So I saw it quite young, and I think it disturbed me in ways that I wasn't quite ready for. And then when I went back to see it, I got it. And I also was really interested in how it got under my skin. I think sometimes a film you feel you don't like is because it gets under your skin in a way that you're not comfortable with. And that was the one that really did it for me. It was the one that I kind of, there was something just about it. It's still got that kind of feel. I think that's why it's such a big film now, because I think it's like people get why it's creepy. There's something so genuinely scary about it that's not easy to just laugh off.
Yeah, it's one of the best from one of the best filmmakers. So this is
Yeah,
John Carpenter's The Thing. It can send one in a loop, really. Like
yeah,
what's going on exactly? What you read, and again, just to be as vague about it as possible, one can watch it a numerous amount of times and still get so much out. I mean, it's that tried and true cliche, but it's true. It's certainly true for a lot of films like The Thing. That's for sure. One can see it, and then every time I see it, I still marvel at what is is my theory about who's who.
yeah.
Is it really hold, or maybe can I look at it through a different perspective or a different theory? And it's like that every single time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it doesn't specify, and it keeps the atmosphere going, and you just feel that something's just it's really good because it doesn't place. It gives you just enough details, but that's it. I can say Madham's the same way; it just gives you just enough details to be scary, and then it pulls back the rest, and you have to work the rest of yourself, and it's much creepier. Yeah, one thing we mentioned influences. A big influence of me as a teenager was John Carpenter and Argento. Both of them were massive influences because I was really into the films when I was a teenager, and they were really big influences on me because they were just making like these weird films in the 80s that were you just couldn't wait for the next one to come out and what the hell is this type of thing. So they were kind of directors whose films, even though they're smaller films, I'd try and hunt down and try and find even the films that were hard to find.
Oh, uh, Carpenter and Argento. Yes, thank you very much. I'm totally with you. And I have to ask you, so what are some of those Carpenter films? You've mentioned The Thing, of course, but what are some other Carpenter films? What are some other Argento films for you? I've got to ask.
Well, for Carpenter, I pretty much figure of Carpenter from Dark Star to They Live is pretty much priceless. I mean, he's I mean, I especially have a soft spot for Salt Precinct 13 and Dark Star. The two I really adore. But I mean, Escape from New York's great. Starman's great. Big Trouble in Little China's amazing. I just watched it over Christmas as a treat to myself. Um, Prince of Darkness is wonderful as well. It's a bit weird, but it's wonderful because it's a Quatermass riff, and I love Quatermass, so it's like, yeah, this is mine. Argento's the same. Argento pretty much from Blood of the Crystal Plumage to Opera. You're getting great stuff non-stop. I mean, I especially like Inferno, Tenebrae, and Four Flies in Grey Velvet. Those are my three kind of, and they're not the ones that are brought up usually. But the thing is, if we say Deep Red is almost a perfect film for that kind of genre. It's kind of like Halloween, where it's perfect. You can't do it better than that. So it's like everyone goes for Deep Red because it's just so well done. It's like the story, the way it's been set up, everything works. The atmosphere's great. It's just like the perfect way to do a giallo film for me. I just don't know how you could do a giallo better than Deep Red because the characters work, the suspense works, and the villains. You like the villains, you understand the villains. It's a moving thing where you actually have sympathy for the villains. You know,
Yeah, I'm again, I'm so happy that you're turning to Argento now. And you mentioned, of course, you mentioned now Deep Red, Profondo Rosso, but also you mentioned Four Flies on Gray Velvet,
yeah,
and others. But Four Flies on Gray Velvet, that's one where talk about talk about like warping reality.
yeah,
You're actually
uh,
talking about situations where suddenly the world is changing before your very eyes, and you're in a
yeah,
completely different space and time. It's like giallo cinema is often compared to that. It has a sort of surrealist atmosphere, how things
yeah,
tend to be manipulated in a way, but that is one of the most
yeah,
heavily warped, manipulated in terms of how reality is treated and almost thrown out the window in a beautiful cinematic way, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a Maitland McDonald book about Argento that's
Yes.
really good. It came out in the late 80s, early 90s. It's a one to read. It's so good because it covers Argento at his peak, just as he's about to go off peak. It
Yeah.
covers all the main work that you really want to read about. I think it's Broken
Broken
Mind.
mirrors, broken minds, right?
Yeah, I've got it
Yeah.
over there. Do you want me to
Yeah.
get it to show? Like I
With
said,
it has the cover, right, with it opera. Yeah. Yeah.
it was, it's this one.
Oh yeah. Okay. Okay.
I have it by my bed.
Okay. It's
This
great.
one,
Yeah.
if you like Argento, read this book. It is so good. It is really something.
I agree. I agree. It's when one talks about cinema texts, you get that was one for me. It was there were a number of them, but that and like the Hitchcock Truffaut book, that
Yep.
it's like that for me. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. That's a great one. And also, you mentioned Tenebrae. I'm so
Yep.
glad you did. And I don't want to go into too much detail, but there are some strong links between Tenebrae and an earlier film you mentioned by De Palma called Raising Cain. So,
Yep.
yeah.
It's a riff on the kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's pretty much De Palma actually riffed on one of the shots in Raising Cain, and it was like, and anyone who knew John knew what the riff was. It wasn't like he was hiding it. It was like, it was brazen. It was like, yeah, I'm doing it, and we all know what film it's from, and it's fun because it's a joke because he adds an absurd. If you've seen that film, it's an absurd joke on that scene. It's like, this is wonderful.
Yeah, I think that's a great moment. Yeah, and yeah, it's great. And wow, so I'm so wow. This is what. And then going back to Carpenter, of course, you talked about Prince of Darkness, Big Trouble in Little China. That's one that's very close to my heart. I'm so glad you said you saw it over the holiday. Is that right?
Yeah. I hadn't watched it for a while. And I was like, I just need to watch this now. This is in lockdown. It's like that's like one of the films you want to watch and just sit back and enjoy. Just so I was trying to watch some films over lockdown that to the Christmas holidays, films that I hadn't watched for a while that I know I enjoyed. Just that was one of them. Was like just try and please yourself rather than trying to watch stuff just for your channel. So. Although I'm pretty sure I'll do a video on it at some point. I'm just not quite sure when. I'm still a bit slow at the moment because it's January. I'm always a bit slow in January getting started again. It's just
well, there's plenty of time. There's plenty of time for discussions and the like. So but that's great too, because now it's bringing me to some sort of further questions, which is maybe going back to what we were starting with in the beginning in your channel. You said at the very start how you're trying to get more into, say, Asian cinema discussions and the like, but maybe without giving away too much of the secret sauce recipe, as it were. Could you let us know what are some things that you're thinking about? Any long-term projects or anything that you're considering or planning that
main
we might be.
Sorry.
Please, no, please. What are some of those plans that you have for your channel, a video series or anything like that, discussion series?
Well, I'm going to finish off watching Tsukamoto films. I'm kind of getting towards the end of them when we got to Christmas. I'd rather just wait and start on them in January and February again. I've got some creative films I want to watch. I just need to start watching them. I've got Jai Zhang. You can see his thing up here somewhere. Terrible with names. For directors, I've got. I'm going to do Herzog because I did one of his films before Christmas. I'm going to do Werner Herzog films. I was going to do it last year, and then Ronan said he was going to do it before I could announce it, and then he never did it, and I was like, So I was kind of frustrated. So I waited a year to give him a chance. I asked him, "Are you going to do this?" Because I was kind of ready to go with that one, and I was like, "So he's just like, yeah, go do it," because he's ready to get someone else he wants to do as well. So it's not like a conflict. So I'm going to do Herzog. I'd like to do Dreyer, but I'll do Herzog first, and then I might see what I feel with Dreyer. I've all these box sets of directors I want to do. It's just covering it, but Korea's one I really went into this year. There's another director name I always forget. He directed The Assassin and Daughter of the Nile. I can't hear.
Thinking about Ho Xiao Xian.
Yeah, I want to. I've got a few. I've got the Eureka one of his, plus up a few of his individual titles. So I might try and watch some of his films this year as well. So I want to get into him. I've still got the two Edward Yangs from the Criterion to watch. I've got a lot of stuff to watch. It's just like whatever one comes first. But I'm definitely going to do Herzog because I've been dying to do Herzog for a while. And Herzog's one of those directors who I really want to go and watch his films again because I really adore Herzog. He's just a wonderful nutcase, you know.
He's certainly one of the filmmakers with one of the most unique filmographies in terms of the types of subject matters that he approaches. Really, really unique. Yeah, I can't wait to hear your discussion about those.
Yeah.
Incidentally, because of the whole the wide range of things, what is the decision process for you? How do you go about choosing what films to talk about for purposes of your YouTube channel?
I've got an easy way of doing it. If I watch a film and it's interesting, I'll do a video. And if I don't think it's interesting enough, I won't. And usually, if it's a series, it has to be a lot of things that interest me. Like I'm doing Malik stuff, but I do that just slowly as I go through things. But a lot of time, it's just a case I'm generally going to go through something if I think it could be interesting. But as long as it's just instinct, like I think I could do some of this. There's other ones I just think I'm not going to be good at this. Like if you look at Ronin stuff, he's been doing Claude Chabrol, and he's been doing Sajid Ray, and it's like that's great. I would never be any good at them. He's great for them, and it's like I think it's just like what director would you be good at, and that's how I choose it because I think the some directors I'd be good at, some directors Ronin would be good at. The some directors like Man v Film would be good at. He covers more exploitation. He just talked about the Jodorowsky stuff from the point of view of someone who'd never seen it before, and it's like, well, that's really good because I would never think of covering it that way, but it's great for getting people interested. So I think it's just a case of finding what I think I can do something interesting on and seeing if it works or not. Because sometimes you do a video and you think, I wasn't quite sure about that one. And that's usually the one people watch. And it's, if you do one you really like, no one will watch it.
It's interesting to see what people respond to. That's for sure. Yeah, I can understand that. But oh no, but thank you very much for sharing a little bit of the thought process of that. That's really interesting. So, and as you say, there's just so much out there to choose from, so much to do, so little time, as it were. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the thing is like you do your videos do out of minds, and sometimes you do cover stuff like I need to see that film before I watch the video, so I might watch your video like 6 months after you've done it. That was something because I want to watch the video first before I watch the film. If I watch your video, I'm sure the same in mine because there's certain films I do no one watches, and then 6 months later people start watching it, and it's like, oh, what happened there? And I think it's just if you do films that are interesting, if it's up, people will find it later sometimes. Because I think most of your videos I watch, I don't watch them when you put them up. I tend to watch them later. You know, like after everyone else has commented on them. You know, it's just because I watch things more way. That makes sense.
No, it does, and I want to thank you so much for that. That really means a lot, and so I thank you very much, Peter. That's very kind of you to do so. And as you say, they're always going to be up there, so it's not like,
Yeah,
and they're not. There isn't any time limit, so it's always good to go at your own pace in terms of not just watching the films, but also reading up on them, or trying to find other discussions on them. But I'm thank you very much for that. So,
yeah,
but I think what that means is that we have so much to look forward to with your podcast work, and then your channel, and then other discussions, and you're still active with film discussion, radio, soundtrack music, and the like. So
yeah,
as I say, you are a man of many hats, Peter, and so
yeah,
I just want to thank you so much
yeah,
for your time today, and
yeah,
just sharing with us a little bit about yourself, and what it is that makes you tick, as it were, as a
yeah.
cinema lover. So this has been really great.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and let's do it again, my friend. But before we go, I do want to ask one last question, which is, would you mind leaving us with a few film recommendations? What would be some things that you could recommend to me and to us, as
Right.
far as things to watch? They could be anything from a recent release, or a particular physical media release that it can be new, it can be not so new, anything you like. What do you have, any recommendations for us
Okay.
before you leave?
One weird one to start with is The Color Out of Space, the Richard Stanley comeback movie. That's one you should try and see. It. Nicolas Cage. It's weird as hell, but it's wonderful. The other ones are just basically try and keep an eye on the Criterion releases. Try and keep an eye on the BFI releases. There's lots of good stuff, but especially try and look at the Buster Keaton box sets that come out, from the shorts to the films that Eureka's been doing. They're amazing. I adore them. They are just so good. That's and the final one would be Woman of the Moon by Fritz Lang, which is one of his films in silent era no one ever watches. So go watch that. I mean, you know the masterpieces already, but these ones I'm just saying that you may have overlooked. You know, so those are my recommendations. Obviously, I'll go back to silent era for most of them because I'm a big silent era fan.
No, thank you so much for that. That's wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. So, but Peter, let us continue this conversation very soon. Is that okay, my friend?
That's cool. Thanks.
Yes, because there are so many more things I have to ask you. We barely talked about silent film, although you brought up a lot of silent film masterpieces, and so
Yeah.
and other films that entered into the early sound era, of course. But
Yeah.
we have to continue that conversation. I'd love to hear your thoughts about that, and also I'm looking forward very much to your own discussions in
Yeah.
your various series, and where and YouTube, and discussion, and review, and criticisms, film criticism
Thanks.
activity. This is going to be really exciting. So just one last thing. So please, where can people find you? And we've spoken a little bit about it, but just as we're leaving, where can people find you if they want more information?
You can find me in Nazarin Prod Productions, Nazarin Prod on YouTube. You can find me in Ronin Nazarin on YouTube for the discussions with Solitary Ronin. And you can find me in Airshot Online Radio for, you can find all my old shows I've done over the past year of all the soundtrack things if you're interested. They're all there. And if you want to see Ronin's old shows as well, they're all there too, and center stuff. Those are the three places, but also just try and catch everyone in our community. So just focus on one person. Try and catch a lot of different creators because there's a lot of good stuff out there that a lot of them cover things you would never think of looking at. So that's what I find helpful watching stuff is just looking to see different people what they're doing.
Thank you very much, my friend, and well said. And we will try to get all that information in the description box of this video. So
Thank
if
you.
yeah, so people can look at those links in the description box below for more information about you, my dear friend Peter, Nazarin Prod. Peter, thank you so much, my dear friend, for this. It's been a great honor and pleasure for me, and let's do it again very soon. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you. And with that, my friends, we will see you again. And until then, cheers.